Fall
We have to go
1994,
now. They're
Abilene,
coming.
Texas.
Who's
The
coming?
fence post
The
stood
men from the
crooked in
town.
the afternoon
We have to
sun.
run.
Weathered wood splitting at the top where decades of Texas wind had worn it down. Walter Hayes gripped the replacement post with both hands, his 75-year-old knuckles white against the grain. The ranch stretched out behind him, modest acreage he'd bought 50 years ago with his first veterinary salary. Honest land, quiet land. His grandson's truck appeared on the dirt road, dust trailing like a question mark. Michael stepped out holding an envelope. The way he carried it, stiff and formal, told Hayes everything before the boy opened his mouth. "Grandpa," Michael said, "I got accepted. Marine Corps." Hayes drove the post into the hole. The thud echoed across empty pasture. He'd known this was coming. The boy's father had served, his father before him. Now the circle was coming around again, the way it always did. "Your mother, no. She asked me to talk to you first." Hayes wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Sweat and dirt mixed there, the smell of work he'd done 10,000 times. Behind Michael, the sun was beginning its long descent toward the horizon. Golden light painted everything the color of memory. "Let me tell you something, son," Hayes said, "about the only time in my life I disobeyed a direct order, and why it was the most important decision I ever made." He walked past Michael toward the house, toward the safe he kept in his study. The old metal box held things he rarely touched. A diary with cracked leather binding. A photograph so faded the faces had become ghosts. A medal most people wouldn't recognize, presented not by the Army, but by something called the German-American Peace Foundation in 1985. "This story starts in November 1944, Hayes said, spreading the items on his desk. "When I was 25 years old and stationed at a place most people never heard of." Michael leaned forward, the recruitment letter forgotten in his hand. "I thought I wanted war," Hayes continued. "Thought that's what made a man. I was wrong about a lot of things back then." He picked up the photograph. 6 wooden barracks behind barbed wire, guard towers at the corners. The compound looked like any other POW facility from that war, unremarkable, except for what happened there. "It started with a complaint," Hayes said, "a simple complaint that changed everything." The old man's eyes went distant, seeing past the walls of his study, past 50 years of silence, back to a cold November morning when the world was still at war. November 1944, Camp Barkley, Abilene, Texas. The train arrived at dawn. Corporal Walter Hayes stood in formation with the other guards watching steam billow from beneath the boxcars. They'd been briefed the night before. 180 German prisoners of war captured in France, transferred from East Coast processing, now bound for Camp Barkley's POW facility. Standard procedure, routine assignment. What they hadn't mentioned was that all 180 were women. Hayes watched them descend from the train cars, moving like shadows in the early light, young ones and old ones. Some still wore remnants of military uniforms. Others had been given civilian clothes that didn't fit. They carried their possessions in canvas bags or simply in their pockets. Everything they owned in the world reduced to what could be held in 2 hands. Sergeant Miller stood beside Hayes, his face carved from granite. Miller had 3 sons. 2 were fighting in Europe. One was already dead, buried somewhere near Normandy. "Don't let the skirts fool you, Hayes," Miller said. "They're still Nazis. Don't forget it." Hayes said nothing. He was thinking about his sister Sarah, dead 6 years now. 16 years old when the sickness took her. The doctors called it idiopathic insomnia, a fancy name for, "We don't know why she can't sleep." He'd sat with her those final months, watching her fade hour by hour, night by night, until there was nothing left but exhaustion and then nothing at all. These women had that same look, hollowed out, eyes too large in their faces. Lieutenant Grace Morrison stepped forward, clipboard in hand. She was 30 years old, career Army, and held herself like someone who'd proven herself 1,000 times and would prove herself 1,000 more. The brass had assigned her to oversee the female POW compound, a woman to watch women. It made sense on paper. "Listen up," Morrison said, her voice carrying across the assembly area. "Geneva Convention minimum standards. Nothing more, nothing less. No fraternization, no personal conversations. They are enemy combatants. You will treat them as such." The women were marched to the compound on the north end of the base, 6 barracks constructed from surplus lumber and salvaged planks. Tar paper roofs, 12-foot barbed wire fence surrounding the perimeter. Guard towers at each corner, though two remained unfinished. The whole setup had been thrown together in 3 weeks when Washington decided Camp Barkley would house overflow POWs. Hayes pulled night watch. The assignment nobody wanted. 2,200 hours to 0600, walking the perimeter while the world slept. But Hayes didn't mind. He'd never been good at sleeping anyway, not since Sarah died. That first night, he learned the sounds of the compound. At 22:30, the lights in the barracks dimmed but didn't go dark. Security protocol. Always maintain visibility. The generator near the fence coughed and stuttered every few minutes, diesel engine protesting the cold. At 2300, a supply truck rumbled past on the nearby road, shaking the wooden structures. At midnight, someone in Barrack C started coughing, a wet sound that didn't stop for 20 minutes. Hayes walked his circuit boots crunching on gravel. Through gaps in the barracks walls, he could see movement. Women shifting on their bunks. The bunks were stacked 3 high wooden frames with canvas stretched across them. No mattresses. 2 blankets per person, if supply was good, one if it wasn't. Every time someone turned over, the whole structure groaned. The sound reminded Hayes of Sarah's bed, how it would creak when she'd finally given up pretending to sleep and just sat there staring at the wall, too tired to move, but too wired to rest. 3 nights into his rotation, Hayes noticed the woman. She stood near the window of Barrack A during his 0200 pass. Older than most of the others, maybe mid-30s. Dark hair pulled back. She wasn't looking out at the compound. She was just standing there, vertical, while everyone else tried to sleep. The next night she was there again. Same position, same 1,000-yard stare. By the 5th night, Hayes started keeping a log. He told himself it was professional diligence. Document everything. But really, he was trying to understand a pattern he'd seen before. 2,200 hours. Lights dimmed. Bob Durham. Coughing begins in multiple barracks. 22:15. Generator noise spikes. Movement increases. 2,300. Truck route passes. Entire compound shifts. 0100. Artillery testing from Fort Hood 60 miles away. Faint but audible. 0300. Guard change, boots on gravel. More movement. 0500. First light. Women begin sitting up, giving up on sleep entirely. Morning roll call on day 7 confirmed what Hayes had been tracking. The women swayed as they stood in formation. One leaned against another for support. A younger one, maybe 19, misjudged her step and stumbled forward before catching herself. Her eyes were dark hollows in a pale face. Morrison walked the line checking counts. She noticed the swaying but said nothing. Hayes stood at attention beside Miller. The older sergeant shook his head. "They're playing us," Miller muttered. "Looking for sympathy, extra rations, better quarters." Hayes watched the young woman sway again. She looked exactly like Sarah had looked 3 months before the end. That same emptiness, that same silent scream. And after roll call, the older woman from the window stepped forward. She spoke English with a heavy accent, but clearly enough to be understood. "We cannot sleep." Morrison stopped. "What?" "We cannot sleep. Not at night, not in day, please." Morrison's jaw tightened. "You have shelter. You have blankets. You have food." Dismissed. The woman stood there a moment longer, then nodded and returned to formation. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who'd expected exactly that response. Hayes couldn't let it go. That night during his 0200 PSN, he did something that violated every protocol in the book. He walked to the window of Barrack A and tapped softly on the frame. The older woman appeared. Up close, Hayes could see the lines around her eyes deeper than they should have been. Intelligence in her gaze. Wariness, too. "I need to know," Hayes whispered. "How long has it been since you slept?" She studied him for a long moment. Guards didn't ask questions like that. Guards didn't ask questions at all. 2 weeks, she finally said. "Some longer. We are breaking." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Who listens? We are enemy." Hayes felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built after Sarah died. "I'm listening. Tell me everything." So she did. Her name was Margaret. Everyone called her Maggie. She'd been a nurse in the German army, captured near Caen during the Normandy breakout. Before the war, she'd worked at a hospital in Munich. She had family there, though she didn't know if they were still alive. She explained about the noise, how it never stopped. The generator, the trucks, the distant artillery, the coughing, the creaking bunks, each sound yanking them back from the edge of sleep over and over, until their minds couldn't tell the difference between waking and sleeping anymore. And the lights, always the lights, never true darkness, always that dim glow painting shadows on the walls, making rest impossible. The bunks, Maggie continued, they are hard, canvas only. Every movement everyone hears. Someone turns, everyone wakes. Like, she searched for the word, like prison, like torture without touching. Hayes thought about Sarah, how she'd described it near the end. The world too loud, her skin too sensitive. Her mind too aware of every tiny sensation until there was no escape, no rest, just endless wakefulness, stretching toward a horizon that never came. I believe you, Hayes said. Maggie's eyes widened. You believe it, my sister. She had a condition. She couldn't sleep either. It killed her. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition. Shared understanding of a specific kind of suffering that most people never witnessed. I'm going to try to help, Hayes said. I can't promise anything, but I'll try on. He spent the next day building his case. Real data, measurements, facts that couldn't be dismissed as sentiment. He borrowed a light meter from the engineering corps and measured the barracks illumination. 58% of full daylight, far above the minimum needed for security. He documented the noise timeline across 8 nights, averaged a disturbance every 3 to 4 minutes between 220 and 0600. He got one of the POWs, a woman named Dorothy who'd been an engineer in civilian life, to sketch the bunk construction. The diagram showed how the 3-tier design amplified every movement, creating a resonance effect. He noted medical observations, fainting incidents per week, coughing fits, visible tremors during roll call. When he finished, he had a 17-page report. Sergeant Miller found him working on it in the guard barracks. What the hell are you doing, Hayes? Hayes didn't look up. Documenting a problem, Sergeant. Those women are Nazis. My nephew died because of Nazis. You understand that? I understand that, Sergeant. Miller sat down across from him. His face softened slightly, the hard edges worn down by something that might have been curiosity or might have been concern. Kid, don't make a trouble for yourself. Do your job. Go home. That's all you gotta do. Hayes finally met his eyes. I signed up to fight evil, Sergeant, not to become it. Miller stared at him for a long moment. Then he stood, shook his head, and walked away. The next morning, Hayes requested a meeting with Major Charles Bennett. Bennett's office smelled like coffee and old paper. The major was 55, a career officer who'd seen action in North Africa and Italy. His desk held a single photograph himself as a younger man standing beside Rommel's captured command vehicle. Make it quick, Corporal, Bennett said without looking up. Hayes placed his report on the desk. Bennett's eyes flicked to it, then to Hayes' face. What's this? A documented problem that needs addressing, sir. The female POWs can't sleep. It's creating a health crisis. Bennett leaned back in his chair. Can't sleep. And this concerns me. Why? Hayes had prepared for this. He kept his voice level, professional, stripped of emotion. Sir, exhausted prisoners get sick. Sick prisoners require medical resources we don't have. They slow processing. They create liability. This isn't about comfort. It's about operational efficiency. Bennett opened the report. He read in silence for 5 minutes. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression. You compiled all this yourself? Yes, sir. You know this violates fraternization protocols? Yes, sir. You talked to the POWs directly? Yes, sir. Bennett closed the report. He stood and walked to his window, looking out over the compound. For a long moment, he said nothing. I was a POW, Bennett said finally. North Africa, 1942. Rommel's forces captured our convoy. They held us for 3 months before we were exchanged. Hayes stayed silent. They treated us according to Geneva Convention. Bennett continued. Nothing more, nothing less. But one night, one of the German guards gave me an extra blanket. Didn't say a word, just left it folded on my bunk and walked away. That blanket saved my life in the desert cold. He turned to face Hayes. That guard taught me something. There's a difference between following rules and doing right. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're not. Yes, sir. What are you proposing here? Blackout curtains, shielded lamps, bunk padding, vehicle route changes. You understand the optics, the political blowback. Yes, sir, but I also understand that if we let these women deteriorate, we're no better than the people we're fighting. Bennett smiled a thin, tired smile. You got balls, Hayes. Stupid balls, maybe, but balls. He sat back down and pulled out a requisition form. I'm approving your recommendations, but there are conditions. You take full responsibility. Anything goes wrong, it's your career, not mine. You sure you want this? Hayes didn't hesitate. Yes, sir, I'm sure. Then get it done. Hayes saluted and turned to leave. Oberon, Bennett called after him. That German guard who gave me the blanket, I never learned his name. Never got to thank him. Don't make the same mistake. If you do this, own it. Be proud of it. Yes, sir. Word spread through the guard barracks before Hayes even made it back. By evening mess, everyone knew. The looks ranged from confusion to disgust to outright hostility. He overheard two guards talking near the latrine. Hayes is helping the Nazis now. Heard his sister died or something. Maybe he's got issues. Issues is right. My brother's in the Pacific, and this guy's tucking in Krauts. Hayes kept his head down and focused on the work. Morrison was less subtle. She cornered him outside the quartermaster's office the next morning. What the hell do you think you're doing, Corporal? Following the major's orders, ma'am. You went around me, directly to Bennett. The issue required command-level decision-making, ma'am. Her face flushed red. This is a mistake. A huge mistake. When this blows up in your face, don't expect sympathy from me. Understood, ma'am. She leaned closer. They're the enemy, Hayes. The people who started this war. The people our boys are dying to stop. You remember that. Every day, ma'am, but they're also people who can't sleep. I remember that too. Morrison walked away without another word. Implementation began that afternoon. Hayes coordinated with supply to requisition blackout curtains salvaged from an old Navy vessel. He worked with the engineering corps to fabricate lamp shields that would reduce light output by 60% while maintaining minimum security visibility. He arranged for canvas padding and wool blankets to be layered and tied to the bunk frames, creating makeshift mattresses that would muffle sound. The hardest part was the vehicle route change. He had to negotiate with the Transportation Command to divert their late-night supply runs around the women's compound. It took 3 phone calls and 1 veiled reference to Major Bennett's authority before they agreed. On November 14th, everything was ready. Morrison made the announcement at morning roll call, her voice flat and unwilling. Changes to barracks accommodations will be implemented today. Blackout curtains, modified lighting, bunk improvements. This is not a reward. This is operational necessity. Any questions will be directed to Corporal Hayes. The women looked suspicious. Some exchanged whispers in German. A few looked at Hayes directly, trying to understand if this was real or some new form of cruelty. Maggie stepped forward. Is real? She asked Hayes, who stood beside Morrison. Hayes nodded once. That afternoon, he supervised the installation personally. He worked alongside Dorothy, the engineer, to ensure the padding was secured properly. The younger woman, the 19-year-old, whose name was Hannah, approached him while he was mounting a lamp shield. Why you help us? She asked. Hayes tightened a bolt before answering. Because it's the right thing to do. But we are enemy. You're people who can't sleep. That's what I see, Tiburcio. She studied him for a moment, then walked away without another word. By 2200 hours the first night, with changes arrived. Hayes took his usual watch position. As darkness fell, he saw the curtains close in Barrack A. The light inside dropped to a soft glow, barely enough to see shapes. The padding muffled the first creak of movement. The rerouted trucks didn't shake the buildings. At 0200, Hayes walked past Barrack A. He looked through the slats. Silence. Almost complete silence. Just the sound of breathing, slow and deep. Maggie stood near the window, her role as the first night watcher. She saw him and nodded once. A gesture of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of something that transcended the barbed wire between them. Hayes nodded back. For the first time in 2 weeks, the women of Camp Barkley slept. And Hayes, walking his lonely circuit under Texas stars, felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Purpose. The next morning at roll call, the difference was obvious. The women stood straight, eyes clearer. No one swayed. No one stumbled. Bennett observed from a distance, arms crossed. When the formation was dismissed, he caught Hayes's eye and gave the smallest nod of approval. Morrison said nothing. But that night in the guard barracks of Higrogs, Hayes heard the whispers, the resentment, the accusations. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made himself other, different, suspect. Sergeant Miller was the only one who spoke to him directly. Kid Miller said, sitting on the bunk across from Hayes, "You got guts. I don't agree with what you did, but I respect that you did it." "Thank you, Sergeant." "Don't thank me yet. This ain't over. Not by a long shot." Miller was right. 3 days later, the first newspaper article appeared. Local reporter got wind of special treatment for Nazi POWs. The headline read, "Camp Barkley Coddles Enemy Women." The article was short on facts, but long on outrage. The phone call started that same afternoon. Angry citizens, concerned congressmen, veterans groups demanding explanations. Hayes knew the real fight was just beginning. But that night, as he walked his watch, he heard something that made it all worthwhile. In Barrack C, someone was singing softly, a lullaby in German, and around her the sound of steady breathing, of sleep, of rest finally found. Hayes thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to her in those final days when she could barely speak, that he'd never let anyone suffer like she suffered, not if he could prevent it. He'd kept that promise. Whatever came next, he'd face it knowing that. The barracks door opened behind him. Major Bennett stepped out, collar turned up against the November cold. "Can't sleep, sir?" Hayes asked. Bennett lit a cigarette. "Thinking about what's coming. Washington's going to raise hell. Morrison's filing complaints. The local community's turning on us." "Yes, sir." "You still think it was worth it?" Hayes looked at the darkened barracks, at the silence that meant peace for 180 souls who'd known nothing but wakefulness for weeks. "Yes, sir, I do." Bennett smoked in silence for a moment. "Good, because tomorrow everything gets harder." The old major walked away, leaving Hayes alone with his watch and his thoughts. Inside the compound, the women slept. Outside the wire, the war continued. And somewhere between those two truths, Walter Hayes stood guard, keeping the night watch over people who'd been enemies just weeks ago, but were now something else. Something more complicated. Something human. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dust and diesel and distant rain. Hayes pulled his coat tighter and kept walking. This was only the beginning. Viết tiếp part 2 theo dàn email với độ dài 4.000 từ 13-29. Orchestrated Cinematic Narrative Continuation Meeting. Structural and Audience Specifications. Week 3, November 1944. Dr. Patterson's report landed on Major Bennett's desk like a grenade without the pin pulled. Hayes stood at attention while Bennett read through the medical documentation, the only sound in the office, the rustle of paper, and the distant clatter of typewriters from the admin building. Patterson had been thorough. 7 pages of clinical observations, charts showing the dramatic improvement in prisoner health. Average sleep duration increased from 2 to 3 hours per night to 6 to 7. Fainting incidents dropped from 12 cases per week to 1. Blood pressure readings normalized. Mental acuity restored. The science was undeniable. Bennett set down the report and looked at Hayes. "You asked Patterson to document this?" "Yes, sir. Thought we'd need evidence." "Smart thinking." Bennett leaned back in his chair. "Unfortunately, evidence doesn't always matter when politics gets involved." He slid a newspaper across the desk. The Abilene Reporter. The headline screamed in bold type, "Camp Barkley Coddles Nazi Women POWs." Below it, a subheading, "Local Hero's Nephew Died at Normandy While Base Pampers Enemy." Hayes scanned the article. Anonymous sources, allegations of luxury accommodations, comparisons to American soldiers freezing in foxholes overseas. The reporter had done their job well, hitting every emotional nerve designed to spark outrage. "Phone's been ringing off the hook," Bennett said. "Congressman Wilson's office called twice yesterday. Veterans groups are organizing. Even got a call from some Baptist church ladies wanting to know why we're giving Nazis better treatment than their boys get." "What do we tell them, sir?" "The truth doesn't sell newspapers, Hayes. The truth is boring. Blackout curtains and padded bunks don't make good copy. But Nazis sleep in luxury while our boys die. That's a headline." Morrison entered without knocking. Her face was flushed, her jaw set in that way Hayes had learned meant trouble. "Sir, I need to speak with you about the prisoner accommodations." Bennett gestured to a chair. Morrison remained standing. I've been fielding calls all morning from concerned citizens. The mayor wants a meeting. The county commissioners want an explanation. This is becoming a public relations nightmare. What would you recommend, Lieutenant? Roll back the changes. Return to standard protocol. Before this gets worse. Hayes felt his stomach drop. Bennett's expression revealed nothing. The medical data suggests that would be inadvisable, Bennett said carefully. Sir, with respect, this isn't about medical data anymore. This is about optics, perception, political reality. Those are the same arguments the Nazis used, Lieutenant. Optics over humanity. Morrison's face went white. Sir, I am not a Nazi. No, but you're willing to let people suffer because of what others might think. That's its own kind of cowardice. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Morrison turned on her heel and walked out. The door didn't quite slam, but it was close. Bennett rubbed his temples. That could have gone better, he muttered. Sir, if this is going to damage your career. My career's already shot to hell, Hayes. I'm 55 years old. I'll retire in 5 years regardless. But you're 25. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You need to think about that. Hayes thought about Sarah, about those last weeks when she'd begged for help, for sleep, for relief that never came, about the promise he'd made at her grave. I've thought about it, sir. I'm in. Bennett studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right then, dig in. It's going to get rough. It got rough fast. By week 4, the local newspaper was running daily updates. Editorial cartoons showed Uncle Sam tucking German soldiers into featherbeds, while American GIs shivered in trenches. Letters to the editor demanded Bennett's resignation. Someone started a petition. The guards stopped talking to Hayes entirely. He ate alone in the mess hall, walked alone to his barracks. Even Sergeant Miller kept his distance now, though Hayes sometimes caught the old sergeant watching him with an expression that might have been sympathy. The isolation was complete. Expected. Hayes had known it would come to this. What he hadn't expected was the letter from home. It arrived during mail call on December 8th, his mother's handwriting on the envelope neat and careful. Hayes opened it in his bunk, away from curious eyes. The first paragraph hit like artillery. Your father read the newspaper articles. He's very angry. Says you're bringing shame on the family. That helping Nazis makes you a traitor to your country and to your sister's memory. Hayes had to stop reading. Put the letter down. Breathe. His father had never understood Sarah's illness, called it attention-seeking, told her to stop being weak. Even at the funeral, he'd refused to cry, as if tears would admit to some fundamental failure of character. Hayes picked up the letter again. But I want you to know something, Walter. I've been thinking about Sarah a lot lately, about how nobody listened to her, how nobody believed her suffering was real. And I think if she were here, she'd be proud of what you're doing. She'd understand that kindness isn't weakness, that seeing suffering and choosing to relieve it, even when everyone tells you not to, that's the strongest thing a person can do. His mother's words continued, but Hayes couldn't see them clearly anymore. His vision had gone blurry. Your father will come around eventually, or he won't. But I raised you to do what's right, not what's easy. I believe in you, son, no matter what anyone says. Hayes folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket over his heart. He had one person in his corner. That would have to be enough. December 16th arrived like a thunderbolt. The news spread through the base before breakfast. German offensive in the Ardennes. Massive assault. Allied lines broken. American forces surrounded. The words bulge and breakthrough and catastrophe echoed through every conversation. The male POW compound erupted in celebration. Hayes could hear them from his guard post cheering and singing. For 3 years they'd been prisoners, defeated, demoralized. Now suddenly hope. The Reich striking back. Maybe the war wasn't lost after all. The American Guard's mood turned black. Hayes saw it in their faces during formation. Anger, fear, rage, looking for a target. They'd been told this war was almost over, that Germany was finished. Now everything felt uncertain again. That afternoon, Miller pulled Hayes aside near the motor pool. Kid, you need to be careful. Always am, Sergeant. No, I mean really careful. Some of the guys are talking about how you're too friendly with the Krauts, about teaching you a lesson. Hayes felt ice in his stomach. Who? Doesn't matter, just watch your back. And maybe don't walk alone after dark. Miller walked away before Hayes could respond. That night, Hayes's watch felt different, the darkness heavier, every shadow a potential threat. He kept his hand near his service pistol and stayed alert, scanning not just the POW compound, but the areas where guards might hide. Nothing happened, but the threat lingered in the air like cordite. The telegram arrived at Bennett's office on December 18th. Hayes only knew about it because he saw Morrison leaving the major's office with a tight smile. She looked at Hayes as she passed and said 4 words. "It's over, Corporal." Bennett called Hayes in an hour later. The telegram sat on his desk. Official War Department letterhead. Hayes could read it from where he stood. Suspend non-essential POW accommodations pending review. Stop, Congressman Wilson. Washington wants the changes reversed, Bennett said. Effective January 1st. Hayes felt the floor tilt beneath him. Sir, that's 2 weeks away. The women have been sleeping. Their health has stabilized. If we reverse now, I know, but orders are orders. Sir, you said yourself that following orders isn't always the same as doing right. Bennett's face was carved stone. I also said I'm a soldier, and soldiers follow orders even when they disagree. What about the medical data? What about Geneva Convention? Geneva Convention requires minimum standards. We've met those. Everything else is discretionary. Hayes stood there, mind racing. 2 weeks, 14 days, then back to the lights, the noise, the sleeplessness. Back to watching women slowly break apart night by night. I can't do this, sir. Bennett looked up sharply. Excuse me? I can't be the one to take it away. I can't look them in the eye and dismantle everything we built. Then you'll be court-martialed for refusing orders. Yes, sir. I know. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Get out of my office, Hayes. Think about what you're saying. Hayes saluted and left. That night was the longest of his life. He sat in the guard barracks after his watch alone in the dark. The other bunks were empty or occupied by men who pretended he didn't exist. The December cold crept through the walls. He thought about court-martial, dishonorable discharge, no veterans' benefits, no future career. His father's shame confirmed, his mother's belief in him proven wrong. He thought about Maggie standing at the window asking if the changes were real, Hannah learning to hope again, Dorothy teaching other women engineering basics, planning for a future beyond wire. He thought about Sarah, always Sarah, the way she'd looked at him 3 days before she died, when the morphine couldn't touch the pain anymore, when her body had simply given up on sleep entirely. Make it mean something, she'd whispered. Promise me. Hayes had promised. At 0200 hours on Christmas Eve, he made his decision. The curtains would not come down. The lamp shields would stay in place. The vehicle routes would remain diverted. He would not follow the order to reverse the changes. Not because he was brave, because he couldn't live with himself otherwise. Morning came cold and clear. Christmas Eve, 1944. Hayes went to the quartermaster's office and filed paperwork requesting maintenance delay on the lighting modifications. Cited structural concerns, technical difficulties, anything to buy time. Morrison found him at lunch. Corporal Hayes, I ordered you to begin removing the curtains today. Yes, ma'am. I'm working on the logistics. Don't play games with me. I know exactly what you're doing. Ma'am, I'm following proper procedure. Removal requires coordination with engineering supply and transportation. These things take time. You're lying. You're deliberately delaying. Hayes met her eyes. Ma'am, I'm ensuring that we don't damage equipment or create safety hazards through hasty action. I'm reporting this to Major Bennett. That's your prerogative, ma'am. She leaned close, voice dropping to a hiss. You're throwing away your career for people who would have killed you without hesitation. Do you understand that? What I understand, ma'am, is that I have to live with my choices, and I can live with this one. Morrison stormed off. Hayes knew he had maybe 24 hours before the hammer fell. Christmas Day dawned gray and cold. Bennett summoned Hayes to his office at 0900. Morrison was already there, standing at attention. Her face was triumph. Corporal Hayes, Bennett began, Lieutenant Morrison reports that you are deliberately sabotaging orders to reverse prisoner accommodations. True. No point in lying now. Yes, sir, I cannot in good conscience execute those orders. Cannot or will not. Both, sir. Bennett's face was unreadable. You understand the consequences. Yes, sir. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, criminal record, no future. And you're willing to accept that Hayes thought about Sarah, about Maggie, about what his mother had written, about the kind of man he wanted to be. Yes, sir. I'd rather have no future than live knowing I had the power to prevent suffering and chose not to. Morrison stepped forward. Sir, this is insubordination. Clear-cut violation of Article 92. I request you file formal charges immediately. Bennett held up a hand. Isam. Lieutenant dismissed. Morrison blinked. Sir, I said dismiss, Lieutenant, now. She looked between Bennett and Hayes, then saluted stiffly and left. The door closed with deliberate force. Bennett waited until her footsteps faded down the hall. Sit down, Hayes. Sir, I'd prefer to stand. That wasn't a suggestion. Sit. Hayes sat. Bennett pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer, poured 2 glasses, slid one across to Hayes. I can't drink on duty, sir. Today you can. That's an order. Hayes picked up the glass. Bennett drank his in one swallow. You just put me in an impossible position. I know, sir. I apologize for that. Don't apologize. You did exactly what I would have done at your age. What I should do now, but don't have the balls for anymore. Hayes said nothing. Here's the situation, Bennett continued. If I court-martial you, I can sleep at night. If I don't, I violate direct orders from Washington. Either way, my career is over. Yeah, sir, you don't have to protect me. Shut up and listen. Bennett poured another whiskey. I've been thinking about that German guard, the one who gave me the blanket. I never knew his name, never learned what happened to him. But I know one thing, that single act of unauthorized kindness saved my life, and I never got to thank him. He looked directly at Hayes. I won't make that mistake with you. From his desk drawer, Bennett pulled a file folder. He opened it, revealing a medical report. Dr. Patterson is going to submit an updated evaluation. It will state that reversal of the current sleeping arrangements would constitute cruel and unusual treatment under Geneva Convention Article 29. That article requires adequate rest and shelter. It supersedes congressional suggestions. Hayes stared. Sir, that's career suicide, yes, but it's also right, and I'm too old and too tired to keep choosing wrong. What about Washington? Let them investigate. Let them ask questions. I'll tell them the truth. That we have medical evidence supporting our position. That Geneva Convention is international law which trumps domestic politics. They can accept it or fire me. Either way, I'll sleep fine. Bennett stood and extended his hand. Hayes shook it. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This buys us time, not victory. Washington will push back. Morrison will file complaints. The community will get uglier. You ready for that? Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. Hayes walked out into the cold December sun feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The fight wasn't over, but for now the women would keep sleeping. He didn't see Morrison watching from across the compound, her face a mask of cold fury. January came with ice. The newspaper coverage intensified. National papers picked up the story. Texas base defies orders to coddle Nazis. Radio commentators weighed in. Letters poured into the War Department. Congressman Wilson began formal inquiries. Hayes's family received threatening mail. Someone threw a rock through his parents' window with a note attached, Traitor's family. Inside Camp Barkley, the tension became physical. Hayes was shoved in the mess line. Found his bunk tipped over one night. Someone poured salt in his coffee. The male POWs heard about the women's accommodations and demanded equal treatment. When denied, they organized work strikes. Operations slowed. Efficiency dropped. The guards blamed Hayes for everything. Only Sergeant Miller still acknowledged him, though even that was brief. A nod, a warning glance, small gestures that said, be careful. Hayes was careful, but he couldn't be everywhere. January 10th, 01:30 hours. Hayes was walking his normal route when he smelled smoke. Not cigarette smoke, not the generator. Something bigger, something wrong. He ran toward the women's compound. Flames were visible through the windows of Barrack C. Orange light flickering, smoke pouring through gaps in the walls. Hayes didn't think, didn't follow protocol, just acted. He grabbed the fire axe from the nearest guard post and smashed through the barracks door. Heat and smoke hit him like a fist. Women were screaming, stumbling toward exits. The curtains had caught fire, first flames spreading to the wooden frame. He could see 3 women trapped near the back. One was Maggie. She was trying to help Dorothy, who'd fallen and injured her leg. Hayes plunged into the smoke. "Get out," he shouted. "Now!" Maggie shook her head. "She cannot walk." A ceiling beam groaned above them. Hayes didn't have time to argue. He lifted Dorothy in a fireman's carry, grabbing Maggie's arm with his free hand. "Move." They made it 5 steps before the beam gave way. It crashed down behind them, blocking the door they'd entered through. Flames were everywhere now. Smoke so thick, Hayes couldn't see 3 feet ahead. He kicked at the wall. Once. Twice. The third time his boot went through, weakened by fire. He kicked again, enlarging the hole. Maggie climbed through first. Hayes passed Dorothy through, then followed. They collapsed on the frozen ground outside. Other guards were arriving now, running with extinguishers and hoses. Hayes lay there, coughing, lungs burning, while chaos erupted around him. Medics arrived. 15 women injured, mostly smoke inhalation. 3 with burns. Dorothy's leg was broken, but no one dead. That was the miracle. Hayes sat on the ground, covered in soot and ash, watching Barrack C burn. It was completely engulfed now. No saving it. The fire brigade could only prevent spread to the other buildings. Bennett arrived still in his nightclothes under a heavy coat. "What happened?" Hayes coughed. "Don't know, sir. Saw flames, went in." "You violated about 15 protocols." "Yes, sir. Saved a lot of lives, too." "Did what anyone would do, sir." Bennett looked at the burning building. "Not anyone. Most people would have waited for backup, for orders, for permission." He walked away to coordinate the response. Maggie approached Hayes. Her face was streaked with soot and tears. "You saved us." Hayes shook his head. "Just did my job." "No, you did more than job. You risked life for enemies." "You're not my enemies anymore." The words hung in the cold air between them. Truth spoken without planning. Hayes realized it was true. Somewhere over the past 2 months, these women had stopped being symbols and become people. Individuals with names and stories and the same basic human needs everyone had. The investigation started immediately. Fire marshal from Abilene, Army investigators, MPS questioning everyone. The evidence emerged quickly. Accelerant used, gasoline, deliberately set fire. This was arson. The trail led to a male POW named Ernst. They found traces of gasoline on his uniform. A guard remembered seeing him near the women's compound earlier that evening, which was unauthorized. Under interrogation, Ernst confessed. But deeper investigation revealed something worse. Ernst had help from the American side. Someone had provided tools, wire cutters to breach the fence, a distraction to draw guards away, gasoline from the motor pool. The trail led to Corporal Davis, a guard from Texas, whose brother had died at Anzio. The arrest happened at dawn. Hayes watched from the guard barracks as MPS led Davis away in handcuffs. Davis saw Hayes watching and spat on the ground. "Traitor," Davis shouted. "You're as bad as them." The military tribunal convened within a week. Davis was tried first. Hayes had to testify. He described the rescue, the fire, the injuries. The prosecutor was efficient and merciless. "Corporal Davis, you provided aid and comfort to a POW attempting to murder other prisoners." Why Davis's lawyer objected to the characterization. The judge overruled. "Because they don't deserve comfort," Davis shouted. "My brother died because of Nazis, and this base is tucking them in at night like their guests. It's wrong. So you decided to burn them alive." "I decided to remind people what war is, what they are." The verdict came quickly. Guilty. 15 years at Fort Leavenworth Military Prison. Ernst's trial was more complicated. He was a POW technically under German military authority. But the attack had targeted other POWs, which created jurisdictional questions. Eventually, he was found guilty and transferred to a disciplinary facility for high-risk prisoners. The trials changed something in Abilene. The local newspaper that had been so hostile ran a new story. The headline read, "Hero Corporal Saves POWs from Fire Set by Fellow American." The article emphasized that Hayes had risked his life for people he could have let die. That Davis, not the German women, was the real threat. Letters to the editors shifted. Not all of them, but enough to create momentum. A farmer whose son had died at Normandy wrote a piece that got reprinted statewide. I lost my boy to Germans. I have every right to hate them. But Corporal Hayes showed us what makes America different. Not cruelty, not revenge, decency, even to enemies, especially to enemies. If we become what we're fighting against, my son died for nothing. The community began organizing. Church groups donated funds to rebuild barracks. See, local contractors volunteered labor. It became a project, a collective act of conscience to counter the act of hate. Hayes supervised the reconstruction. The new barracks was built better than the original. Improved insulation, acoustic dampening in the walls, properly installed lights with built-in shields, even individual storage cubbies for personal items. The women helped where they could, painting, organizing supplies, small tasks that gave them purpose and ownership. On January 20th, the new barracks was completed. Bennett called an assembly. Women POWs and guards. Even Morrison attended, though she stood in the back with her arms crossed. What happened here, Bennett began, was a test, not of the prisoners, of us. And I'm proud to say most of us passed. He called Hayes forward. Corporal Walter Hayes, for courage in the face of dangers and moral conviction in the face of pressure, I'm awarding you the Army Commendation Medal. Hayes stood awkwardly while Bennett pinned the medal to his uniform. The women applauded. Even some of the guards joined in, though not all. After the ceremony, Hayes inspected the new barracks one final time. Maggie found him there checking the lamp shields. Morrison stood nearby, allowing the brief conversation. Thank you, Maggie said, for everything, for Sarah too. Hayes looked up. How do you know about Sarah? Dr. Patterson told Dorothy. Dorothy told me. You did this because of your sister. She would be proud. Hayes's throat tightened. I hope so. You are a good man, Corporal Hayes. Don't let anyone tell you different. Morrison cleared her throat. Time's up. As Maggie walked away, Hayes felt something shift. The weight he'd been carrying since Sarah's death had lightened somehow. Not gone, but bearable. That night, he walked his watch under cold January stars. The new barracks glowed softly from within. Through the windows, he could see women settling into bunks, pulling blankets close, letting their eyes drift shut. Sleep. Simple, essential human sleep. Hayes thought about the key, his isolation from the other guards, his strained relationship with his father, the threats and hostility, the fire and the injuries, Bennett's career permanently damaged, Morrison's resentment that would never fade, and he thought about the gain. 180 women sleeping soundly, one life Dorothy saved from flames, one small corner of the world where humanity had won out over hate. The math was simple. It had been worth it. Via tia part ba teo jan I mo vo dozai bongin to mui ba ba mui ba. Orchestrated bongin word narrative, part ba with emotional climaxes and plot twists. February mo ngin chincham bon mui lam. The war was dying, though it refused to die quietly. News from Europe filtered into Camp Barclay in fragments. The Rhine crossing, Soviet troops approaching Berlin, German cities reduced to rubble. Every morning brought fresh reports of collapse, retreat, surrender. The 1,000-year Reich was measuring its remaining life in weeks. Hayes watched the male POW compound from his guard tower. The celebration after the Ardennes offensive had lasted 3 days. Now those same men sat silent in their barracks, staring at nothing. Reality settling in like frost. The women's compound was different. Quieter, but not empty. Hayes could see them during exercise periods walking the perimeter, talking in small groups. They weren't celebrating Germany's collapse, but they weren't mourning it either. Something more complicated played across their faces. Relief mixed with dread. Relief that the war would end. Dread about what they'd return to. Major Bennett had implemented new programs. Rehabilitation through education. Dorothy taught engineering classes using borrowed textbooks and scavenged materials. Maggie organized basic medical training. Even Lieutenant Morrison had softened enough to approve education supplies, though she still avoided eye contact with Hayes. On March 15th, Hayes was supervising a supply delivery when he noticed Hannah sitting alone near the fence. The 19-year-old who'd once asked why he helped them. She was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. Hayes shouldn't have approached. Protocol forbade unnecessary interaction, but some rules mattered less than others. You all right? He called through the fence. Hannah looked up, wiping her eyes quickly. News from Hamburg. Bombing. Very bad. Your family? I don't know, no letters, nothing. Her English had improved dramatically over the past months. I think maybe they are gone. Hayes had no comfort to offer. The truth was brutal and simple. Millions were gone. Cities erased. Families scattered like ash. I'm sorry, he said, because there was nothing else. Hannah nodded. You are good man, Corporal Hayes. Even when we are enemy, you see us. Not many people do that. She walked away before he could respond. That night, Hayes thought about what she'd said, about seeing people instead of symbols. It seemed like such a small thing, basic human decency. But in war, apparently basic decency became revolutionary. April 30th arrived with spring rain. The news broke during evening mess. Hitler dead. Suicide in his Berlin bunker. The Fuhrer who'd promised eternal glory had chosen a coward's exit. The American guards erupted in cheers, Ataz. Men who'd been hostile to each other for months united in celebration. Someone produced a hidden bottle of whiskey. Toasts were raised. Songs were sung. Hayes slipped away to the women's compound. The reaction there was muted. Some women sat in stunned silence. Others wept. A few of the older ones, the true believers, refused to accept it as fact. Propaganda, they insisted, ways. But most simply looked exhausted, not sad, not happy, just tired. Maggie stood near Barrack, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. Hayes approached the fence. It's over, she said. Not a question. Not officially, but yes, it's over. What happens now? I don't know, repatriation probably. They'll send you back to Germany. Maggie laughed a sound without humor. Germany. There is no Germany anymore. Just ruins and ghosts. Your family in Munich. Dead, all dead. I received letter last week. Apartment building hit in bombing. My mother, my sister, my niece. All gone in one night. Hayes didn't know what to say. The magnitude of loss was beyond words. I'm sorry. Maggie turned to face him fully. You say that word often, Corporal Hayes. Sorry. But you have nothing to be sorry for. You saved us. You gave us sleep, dignity, humanity. You are one good thing in all this darkness. She walked away before he could see her crite. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. The official announcement came at 0900 hours. Total German surrender. All fighting in Europe ceased. The war that had consumed the world for 6 years was finally over. Camp Barclay exploded in celebration. Guards fired rifles in the air. Trucks drove through the base honking horns. Someone raised an American flag so large it could be seen from a mile away. The noise was tremendous, joyful, wild. Hayes stood apart watching. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow, empty, like he'd been running for years and suddenly stopped, only to realize he'd forgotten his destination. That evening, Major Bennett gathered the women POWs for an announcement. The war in Europe is over, he said. You will be repatriated to Germany in phases beginning in July. You'll be screened, processed through denazification protocols, then released to civilian authorities. The women stood silent. A few exchanged glances. Most just stared at the ground. I know you're scared, Bennett continued. I know Germany isn't the country you left, but you'll survive. You're stronger than you think. After the announcement, Hayes watched Maggie walk to the fence. She stood there for a long time looking out at the Texas landscape beyond the wire. Hills and sky and freedom she couldn't touch. Hayes joined her on his side of the barrier. What will you do? He asked. I don't know. Return to Munich, I suppose. See what's left. Try to rebuild. You could stay. She looked at him sharply. Stay here. In America, apply for asylum. We need nurses, especially ones with your experience. Why would America want me? I am German. Enemy. You're a person who deserves a future. That's what I see, Sayemayu. Maggie studied his face for a long moment. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. I will think about it, she said quietly. June 15th, first departures. 60 women were processed for return to Germany. Hayes helped with the paperwork, the medical checks, the endless bureaucracy of moving human beings across an ocean. Hannah was among the first group. She found Hayes the morning of departure, standing near the transport trucks. Corporal Hayes, I want to say goodbye. Good luck, Hannah. I hope you find your family. If I do not find family, I will make new one, build new life. She paused. You taught me something important. What's that? That questioning is not weakness. That seeing truth even when it hurts is strength. She extended her hand through the fence. Thank you for seeing me. Not soldier, not Nazi, just person. Hayes shook her hand. Write to us. Let us know you're safe. I will, I promise. He watched her board the truck, young and fragile and impossibly brave. The truck pulled away, carrying her toward an uncertain future in a destroyed homeland. Hayes wondered if he'd ever know what happened to her. 2 weeks later, Dorothy departed. She'd spent the past months teaching engineering to anyone who would listen. Her final gift to Hayes was a small notebook filled with technical drawings and calculations. For you, she said, so you remember that enemies can become teachers. That destruction can turn to building. What will you do in Germany? Rebuild bridges, literal ones and the other kind. She smiled. I built weapons before, now I build connections. You showed me redemption is possible. You showed me the same thing. Dorothy nodded and joined her departure group. Hayes watched another truck pull away, carrying another piece of the story that had changed his life. July 10th, Maggie's hearing. The asylum application process was complex and hostile. Immigration officials skeptical. Board members asking pointed questions. Why should America admit a former enemy combatant? What guarantees could she offer? What value did she bring? Hayes testified as a character witness. So did Dr. Patterson. They presented medical credentials, work history testimonials from other POWs about her leadership and compassion. The hearing lasted 3 hours. The board chairman, a stern man named Collins, leaned forward during the final questions. Miss Weber, you served in the German military. You supported a regime responsible for millions of deaths. Why should we believe you've changed? Maggie sat straight, hands folded calmly in her lap. I was German nurse before Hitler. I will be nurse after Hitler. I did not support regime, I survived it. There is difference. Many Germans say that now. How do we know you're telling the truth? Hayes stood. Sir, if I may. Collins frowned. Corporal Hayes, you're here as witness, not advocate. Yes, sir, but I've worked with Miss Weber for 8 months. I've seen her help injured women regardless of their politics. I've seen her maintain order when chaos would have been easier. I've seen her choose humanity over ideology every single day. Your opinion is noted. Sit down. Hayes sat frustrated. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. When they returned, Collins's face revealed nothing. Miss Weber, your application for asylum is approved conditional on 5 years work service in medical field. You will be assigned to a hospital in Texas, supervised and reviewed annually. Violation of terms will result in immediate deportation. Do you accept these conditions? Maggie's composure cracked. Tears streamed down her face. Yes. Yes, thank you. Outside the hearing room, Hayes found her sitting on a bench, still crying. You did it. I did not think they would say yes. I thought for certain no. You earned it. You'll do great things here. Maggie looked at him with an expression Hayes couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but something more. Something that made his chest feel tight. I could not have done without you, she said. You saved my life many times, not just from fire, from giving up. I just did what anyone would do. No, Walter, not anyone. You. It was the first time she'd used his first name. The sound of it in her accented voice felt like a door opening. August 15th, Japan surrendered. The war was truly over now. Every theater, every front. The fighting that had consumed the world for 6 years had finally ended. Hayes was eligible for discharge. His service record was complicated. The Commendation Medal sat alongside Morrison's formal complaints in multiple investigations. He'd been both hero and troublemaker, often on the same day. Major Bennett called him in for a final meeting. What are your plans, Hayes? Don't know yet, sir. Haven't thought much beyond today. You should use the GI Bill. Get an education. Build something. Hayes had considered it. Before the war, he'd dreamed of veterinary school, working with animals instead of people. The quiet nobility of healing without words. Texas A&M has a good veterinary program, Bennett said. I could write you a recommendation. After everything that happened, the disobedience, the investigations, Bennett smiled. Because of everything that happened, you showed moral courage when it mattered. That's rarer than people think. Hayes applied to Texas A&M that week. He was accepted for the January 1946 term. September 1945. Last departures. The final POW group left Camp Barkley on a cool autumn morning. The women's compound was dismantled piece by piece, barracks emptied, fences removed. The space that had held so much suffering and redemption returned to bare Texas earth. Hayes walked through the empty compound one last time. In Barrack C, the rebuilt one, someone had written on the wall in chalk. They slept here. We helped. W.H. September 1945. He didn't remember writing it. Must have been during the construction, some unconscious need to mark what had happened here. Lieutenant Morrison found him staring at the words. Corporal Hayes. Ma'am. A long silence stretched between them. I was wrong about you, Morrison said finally. You were right. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. Hayes turned to face her. Her usual rigid posture had softened slightly. You did what you thought was right, ma'am. We all did. I did what was safe. You did what was right. There's a difference. She extended her hand. You'll make a good veterinarian. Animals are lucky to have you. They shook hands. Morrison walked away back straight, leaving Hayes alone with the ghosts of 180 women who'd found sleep in the least likely place. 1946 through 1950. Hayes threw himself into veterinary school. The work was demanding, technical, all-consuming. He studied anatomy and pharmacology and surgical techniques. He learned to read animals the way he'd learned to read people, understanding suffering that couldn't be voiced. He graduated top of his class in 1949. Letters arrived regularly from Germany. Hannah wrote about teaching in Hamburg, helping children understand the truth of what had happened. Dorothy sent photographs of bridges under construction in Frankfurt, concrete, and steel rising from rubble. Maggie was assigned to Methodist Hospital in Abilene, a coincidence that felt like fate. They ran into each other at a grocery store in early 1947. Awkward at first. Former guard and former prisoner meeting as civilians. But coffee followed, then dinner, then regular visits. They talked about everything except the war. Hayes described his studies. Maggie described her patience. They built a friendship on the foundation of shared trauma, slowly, carefully testing whether connection could survive without crisis to fuel it. In 1949, a letter arrived from Major Bennett. Walter, I heard through the grapevine about you and Maggie. People will judge. Let them. You earned happiness. Take it. P.S. Morrison married Dr. Patterson last month. Life is wonderfully strange. Hayes proposed that Christmas, simple and direct the way he did everything. I know it's complicated, but I love you. Have since the night you asked how long we couldn't sleep. Maggie cried and laughed and said yes. They married quietly in January 1950. Dr. Patterson officiated. A handful of friends attended. No family, no fanfare. Just two people who'd found each other in the least likely circumstances, choosing to build something new from the ashes of war. Hayes accepted a job at a ranch outside Abilene. Maggie continued nursing. They bought a small house with a porch that faced west towards sunsets that painted the sky the same gold as memory. Life became simple. Good. Whole. Fall 1994. Present day. Michael stared at his grandfather, the recruitment letter forgotten in his hand. So Grandma Maggie was a German POW. That's why she had the accent. That's why. And you risked everything to help her. To help all of them. Hayes nodded. Not because I was a hero, because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. What happened to the others, Hannah and Dorothy? Hannah became a teacher. Taught the truth about the Holocaust to German children for 40 years. Died in 2003. Dorothy helped rebuild 47 bridges. Passed in 2008. Hayes's voice softened. Your grandmother worked as a nurse for 40 years. Delivered over 3,000 babies. Saved more lives than I can count. She died 2 years ago, Michael said quietly. Best thing that ever happened to me meeting her. Even under those circumstances. Especially under those circumstances. Michael looked at the recruitment letter. What do you think I should do, Grandpa? Can't tell you that, son. It's your choice. But I'll tell you what I learned. Whatever you do, do it with a clear conscience. If you get orders that are wrong, have the courage to refuse them. If you see suffering you can prevent, don't look away. That's a lot to live up to. Not really. It's just being human. which is harder than it sounds but simpler than people think. Hayes stood, joints creaking. Come on, want to show you something. They drove to the old Camp Barkley site. Most of it was gone now, reclaimed by scrubland and development, but a historical marker remained along with a small museum. The plaque read Camp Barkley POW Facility, 1943 to 1946. Site where Corporal Walter Hayes demonstrated that humanity transcends conflict. His actions remind us that courage is not just fighting enemies, but protecting their dignity. Sleep is a human right, not a privilege. Margaret Weber Hayes, 1985. Inside the museum, glass cases held artifacts. Hayes's original logbook pages yellowed but preserved. A section of blackout curtain, photographs of the barracks, letters from Hannah and Dorothy, the commendation medal Bennett had awarded. A young museum guide approached, then stopped when she recognized Hayes. Oh my goodness, you're him. You're Walter Hayes. Just here to show my grandson. We have so many questions. Would you be willing to do an interview for our oral history project? Hayes shook his head gently. Appreciate it, but no. Just wanted the boy to see where it happened. The guide nodded, disappointed but respectful, and left them alone. Hayes and Michael walked to where Barrack C had stood. Nothing remained now except grass and Texas sky. The wind moved through the space like breath. Right here, Hayes said. This is where they slept. 180 women. Most I never knew their names, but every night when I went home to your grandmother, I remembered them. Sleep is a gift. Never take it for granted. Michael was quiet for a moment. Grandpa, I have something to tell you. What's that? I'm not joining the Marines. Hayes turned to face his grandson fully. I've been thinking about what you said, about doing what's right, not what's easy. And I realized something. I don't want to fight. I want to help. Michael took a breath. I'm applying to medical school. I want to be a doctor, like Grandma was a nurse. Help people. Hayes felt emotion swell in his chest, threatening to overflow. Maggie would have been so proud. Was proud somewhere. Son, that's the best decision you could make. You're not disappointed. Disappointed you're choosing to heal instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy. That's everything I tried to teach you. They stood together in the empty field where so much had happened, where suffering had been relieved, where enemies had become people, where a young corporal had learned that courage sometimes meant disobeying orders and living with the consequences. Do you regret any of it? Michael asked. Hayes considered. While following orders, never. Losing friendships with the other guards. Sometimes the threats against my family, those were hard, but meeting your grandmother because of it all, never, not for 1 second. What was the hardest part? Choosing, making that first decision to help when everyone said don't. Everything after flowed from that, but that first moment of choosing conscience over compliance, that's what changed everything. They walked back to the truck. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold. The same light that had illuminated this place 50 years ago when Hayes had walked his night watch. Michael, you're going to face moments in your life where you have to choose between what's right and what's easy, between conscience and convenience. When those moments come, and they will come, remember this. Hayes gestured at the empty field, at the memorial, at the space where history had been made through small acts of defiance and large measures of compassion. Remember that individual choices matter, that one person refusing to accept cruelty can change the world, even if it's just the world inside a barbed wire fence. Remember that seeing the humanity in your enemy is the bravest thing you can do. Michael nodded, understanding, settling across his young face like dawn. They drove home in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that exists between people who don't need words to communicate, the kind of silence Hayes had fought to give 180 women so many years ago. That night, Hayes sat on his porch watching stars emerge over the Texas plains. Maggie's chair sat empty beside him, but he could still feel her presence, could still hear her voice saying his name in that accent she never quite lost. She'd been gone 2 years, but the lessons remained. The story remained. The proof that even in the darkest times, even when surrounded by hatred and fear and violence, individual humans could choose differently, could choose better. Inside, Michael was on the phone with his mother, explaining his decision to pursue medicine instead of military service. Hayes could hear the excitement in his voice, the hope, the determination to build rather than destroy. The old man smiled. This was the legacy, not medals or monuments, not headlines or history books, but the quiet passage of values from one generation to the next. The teaching that compassion matters, that conscience matters, that small acts of decency in the face of institutional cruelty can ripple forward through time. Somewhere in Germany, children sat in classrooms learning truth because Hannah had survived to teach it. Somewhere in Frankfurt, traffic crossed bridges Dorothy had helped rebuild. In Abilene, thousands of people lived because Maggie had delivered them into the world, or healed them when they were sick. And now Michael would carry it forward, would heal in his own way, would make his own choices when the moments came. Hayes closed his eyes and let the night settle around him. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he could see them all. Sarah young and suffering. Maggie at the window asking if the changes were real. Hannah stumbling at roll call, Dorothy sketching diagrams, Bennett making the hard choice. Morrison finally admitting she'd been wrong. All the moments that had led him here. All the choices that had defined not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of others. It had been worth it. Every consequence. Every connaisse. Every lonely night and hostile glare and threatened career. Worth it for the simple gift of sleep given to people who had no right to expect kindness from their captors. Worth it for the chance to prove that humanity could survive even war's attempts to destroy it. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, but Hayes wasn't thinking about stars. He was thinking about curtains and lamp shields and padded bunks, about a young corporal who couldn't stand by while people suffered, about an old man who'd lived long enough to see his choices validated by time, about Michael choosing healing over harm. The circle complete, the story told, the lesson passed on. Hayes opened his eyes and looked at the empty chair beside him. "We did good, Maggie," he whispered to the night. "We did real good." The wind carried his words away, across the plains toward the place where Camp Barkley had stood, toward the ghosts of 180 women who'd found rest when they'd expected only torment. And somewhere in that wind, in that darkness, in that vast Texas night, Hayes felt her answer. Yes, we did. He sat there until the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across his small ranch, the land he'd bought with his first veterinary salary, the home he'd built with Maggie, the life they'd created from the ashes of war. Tomorrow, Michael would begin his journey toward medical school, would learn to heal, would carry forward the values Hayes and Maggie had fought so hard to preserve. But tonight, the old veteran simply sat with his memories and his pride and his profound gratitude that he'd been given the chance to make one moment of difference in a world that desperately needed such moments. The night watch was over, had been over for 50 years. But its lessons remained eternal, as the stars simple as sleep, profound as the choice between cruelty and compassion. Hayes stood slowly, joints protesting, and walked inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to do right in a world that constantly tested such resolve. But tonight he would sleep peacefully, knowing that his watch had mattered, that his choices had echoed forward through time, that somewhere because of what he'd done, the world was slightly better than it might have been. That was enough. That was everything. Walter Hayes closed the door behind him and turned off the porch light, leaving only stars to watch over the quiet Texas night.